the Jet Setting Wealth Advisory Podcast, where your financial journey takes flight with David T.U. As an airline pilot and financial expert, David merges the aviation industry and wealth management to help you navigate today's complex financial skies. Each episode features expert insight, blending personal stories with essential financial strategies. We ask that you fasten your seatbelts and sit back as we prepare for takeoff. Our destination, your financial empowerment.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Jet Setting Wealth Advisory Podcast. I'm your host, David T.U. And today we're so happy to be joined by Kit Darby, a leading authority in pilot career development and aviation workforce forecasting. With over 40 years of experience in aviation, Kit has been instrumental in guiding thousands of pilots, including myself, and aviation organizations through the complexities of hiring trends, compensation analysis, and long-term career planning. As the founder and president of kitdarby.com Aviation Consulting, Kit's data-driven approach has made his firm a trusted resource for pilots, airlines, and educational institutions looking to navigate the evolving airline pilot job market. His expertise is often cited by aviation organizations and even Congress in discussions on pilot shortages and industry sustainability. In today's episode, we'll dive into Kit's remarkable career to explore the latest trends in the aviation job market and how pilots can strategically plan their career for long-term success. So Kit, welcome to the show. Great to have you here.
Great. Thanks for having me.
Fantastic. So let's talk about your journey. How did you get into the aviation and what inspired you to start this pilot hiring career development institution?
Well, I like driving, and I figured I would like flying, although I had nobody in my family that had anything to do with airplanes.
Okay.
I planned to be in the Air Force. I was at NC State Air Force ROTC. It was a 4-year program, ROTC. The trouble was it was a 6-year program for the architecture that I was under. So
Okay.
I was eager, did my first 2 years, got ready to start advanced ROTC, and I was told I couldn't start until my last 2 years coincided with graduation, and that was 2 more years away. At the end of 4 years, my 4-year deferment was up. I was not yet back in ROTC, and I was drafted. So after being drafted, I went into the Army and immediately applied for aviation. Got that. Had a friend of my mother. She worked at 18th Airborne Corps at Fort Bragg. Her colonel with wings on advised that I be a fixed wing pilot if I wanted to be an airline pilot, and I did. So I checked the box that said airplanes only. They laughed because the Army at the time was 90% helicopters. But they eventually gave it to me, and I went off to fixed wing flight school. And then I was on orders for Vietnam for several years, but they trained too many. I never had to go. I got a chance to volunteer. I decided not to volunteer for war. Became an instructor during the fuel shortage. There was a lack of fuel and only the instructors were flying. So I volunteered to be an instructor. Turned out I really liked it. Stayed in for my initial commitment. And they said, you're going to Germany. And I said, great, what am I flying? And they said, oh no, you're a infantry officer. You're going to be an infantry captain on the ground in Germany.
Oh, okay.
And I said, what else you got? And they said, helicopter school. I went off to helicopter school. At least it was flying. And while I was there, I campaigned to be a flight commander in the fixed wing division. And I had done a lot of flying, 2,200 hours at that point, with 1,000 instructor hours. So I was fortunate enough to become a flight commander and did that until I got out of the service. So I got ready to get out early, and there was a recession, so I waited a little while. I finished my degree. I switched from architecture and product design to Embry-Riddle Aeronautical Science and got my degree there. Got out and got hired, regrettably, by Braniff, which didn't last too long. They failed. I moved over to Capital. They didn't last too long. I was an engineer and co-pilot at Braniff, a co-pilot and captain at Capital, and then hired by Piedmont and United, sort of all at the same time. Got a job with Republic for a few months, hired by Piedmont and United. Chose United because they had a much better retirement program, and bigger planes. Bigger planes were bigger paychecks. So I did that for 23 years. Along the way, when these companies kept going out of business, I initially started a resume service, which I rolled into the old FAPA, the Future Airline Pilots, and we added resumes there, and eventually added the job fairs, one every 2 months, and a whole bunch of publications. They had a newsletter. We added magazines, salary surveys, and so forth. And a lot of what we'll talk about today, the salary survey was used for pilots that were injured, killed, delayed in their careers. And that's still my main business, where I put a dollar value. If you're delayed a year, lose your career, lose your medical, or involved in a fatal accident. So you basically don't want to see me coming, but if I'm coming, I'm basically going to be able to put a dollar value, which has withstood very nicely in court. Never been defeated actually in a court situation where we're establishing these career values. Typical career values today are, anywhere from 12 to $20 million in today's dollars. So they are huge. And that's where I still make my senior captains pay and consulting in that area. But I do work with individual pilots. We do resumes, of course, application reviews, interview preparation, and a whole lot of mentoring for people that have problems. If they have accidents, incidents, violations, training failures, asked to resign, we help them adjust their application, resume, and interview to handle those types of what we would call disclosure items, things that can cause them trouble in the interview. So we work with a smaller group. We used to have a staff of 40 and 20,000 members, and now it's myself and a couple of retired captains and a good resume writer, and we're a very small group. And it also supports my expert witness business because it keeps me in the hiring game.
I see. So let me just go down the path a little bit. I know you've got some data and some information you would like to share with us with your PowerPoint presentation. You've worked as a military pilot and airline captain for the one of the largest airlines in the world, and of course, an aviation consultant. What was the defining moment that shifted your path towards data-driven career advocacy and consulting?
Well, I was sort of doing that in the Army. I was when I got there, the checklist sort of stayed behind the co-pilot seat. Nobody really used it. The training guide, if you did a stall one to the left, I'm pretty sure people would have come back and done one to the right and one straight ahead. It was all just rote. And some of the airplanes I flew, the larger ones, I had a pretty good range of performance data that needed to be. So we introduced a takeoff data card. We rewrote the manuals, the aircrew training manuals, which wasn't new. I mean, the Air Force had it. We just wrote them for the Army. And in that, we began to develop a lot of data, some of which we found was wrong. I flew a STOL airplane that everybody added extra airspeed to. And I said, we shouldn't do that. We're doing it by the book. So what is the book wrong? Turned out the book was wrong. So it was a STOL airplane. They had 1.1 approach speeds in it. Everybody was adding additional speed for a really good reason. I mean, if you weren't flying STOL approach to a short runway, you don't need to be 1.1 on final.
Right.
So I had to load an airplane up to mission weight and went out. When the first time I pulled the stick back to rotate, the nose did not come up. So it was that slow. So it was like, we need to change this. So I started getting, my handle was Captain Statistic in the Army. So I just thought of when I got to the career, I applied the same principles. There was a lot of rumor. Everybody knew somebody that worked 10 days and somebody that worked 20 days. And it's sort of dependent on, turns out the average is about 15, but it was for that person, whoever they knew. So we analyzed bid sheets. We got all the contracts, made our first salary survey in 1984. And people were coming, had friends that were injured, lost their medical, lost their career, and they were at court and they were saying, I need a number. So the first ones we did on a ledger, literally spec'd it out, and my accountant did the calculations. And then we moved over to Lotus 123 and finally Excel. And today we spend our life in Excel and Word.
Sure.
We have models built for all the majors, most of the regionals, fractionals, corporate, pretty much all the different professional careers. And we can use those to build a typical career for someone who's already established, like an existing major airline pilot, or for someone who's young that may work at any of the major airlines, which at that point we average the sum of them.
Okay. So since you've talked a little bit about the information that you have and you have calculated, would you like to share this information with us? Please feel free to share your screen. Sure. And please give us the data that you have.
I have 3 presentations that I make each year
Okay.
at Oshkosh, Sun and Fun, and an organization called RTAG, which was
Okay.
Rotary to Airline Group, for what started out as military Army helicopter pilots. Now it's pretty much all types of military pilots. So
Okay.
can you see that okay?
Yes. Great.
All right. So this is my most recent presentation, was at Sun and Fun just a few weeks ago. And this is the, let me see if it's going to change for me here. There we go. So this is, when I retired from United, I went to work for Boeing for 5 years, and then Boeing bought the 717s and hired
Sure.
4 Boeing guys at Delta. So I was a 717 instructor at Boeing at Delta for 3 years, and
Okay.
then moved over to the ATP CTP course. So I was there a total of 10 years. I now teach the ATP CTP for Sanders Aviation in Jasper, Alabama, which specializes in military to civilian transitions. So 717 was the first 6 glass screen cockpit, great airplane. This is my military airplane, the OV-1, STOL aerobatic single pilot, all the fun you're allowed to have in the Army. So great airplane. I'm a retired United captain, had about 24,000. I flew a full schedule at United. And since working at Boeing and Delta, about 7,000 additional in simulators. I've been in the career business for 35, almost 40 years now. My military time was 4,400. My civilian time, about 1,900, 19,000, 20,000. So helped a lot of pilots in the membership organization. We had over 200,000 over 10 years. I'm a veteran of 5 airlines, plus Boeing and Sanders Aviation. Many people may remember the binder, 5,000 pages published annually. I do these workshops at the RTAG Sun and Fun in Oshkosh, like we talked about. We review apps. We make this presentation primarily to pilots on the way up. So we're looking for up-to-date information to help them develop as good candidates. We give typical career values, which I've got an updated version of that if we have time at the end. And we talk about the recruiting retirement today, which is in a great state of flux.
Okay.
So when COVID hit, I sat down day one and drew this diagram based on what had happened before, but STARS, 9/11, all the different catastrophes in the past. What did I think might happen? With no information at all, just day one practically. So the red was actual information. So I had maybe 3 months of actual information. And then this is version 10. So as we went into it, it went deeper than I thought, but it came back pretty close to my middle guess day one as what we were doing. We had 2 separate recoveries, domestic and international. International either couldn't go, or if you got there, you had to quarantine for 2 weeks. Didn't really work for quite a while. The airlines today, if we take the trend line from back in the early 2000s, which we were back to in 2019, we're actually slightly above that now in 24, 25, especially after the big dip. Much bigger effect than, say, 9/11 or the Great Recession, a much bigger effect on the airlines. The big things that drive the hiring, of course, are retirements, about 50%, and the other part is growth. Retirements, we can get off the seniority list and put the number of retirements, and actually it's the percentage of retirements that really matter, not the number. If you have 10 pilots and get 10 pilots, everybody's a captain. If you have 17,000 pilots and get 10 pilots, you might get a weekend off, you know. So when you put it cumulative, American still has the highest retirements. When you put them together and add in regional, corporate, and fractional, we come out with a 3,500, 4,500 pilots per year long term that would be needed to cover the retirements alone. Okay, and of course, growth would double that. Put it cumulative, 80,000 plus jobs next 10, 15 years. Looking at the individual, I put that same traffic information that I did in my initial forecast into a pilot demand forecast. We had a stimulus. We had pilots that were going to be furloughed. They warned 10,000 pilots initially during COVID, the WARN Act being a 30-day notice that you're going to be furloughed. And that was just the first round. There probably would have been 20,000 furloughs at COVID based on traffic alone. But we had a big early retirement of 5,000 or so. We had partial job sharing and so forth. And the real thing was we got the CARES Act. So here's CARES 1, 2, and 3. And those took us to the point that the airlines could begin to see recovery. The combination of the 5,000 retirements, early retirements, and the support from the CARES Act. And the CARES Act, by the way, most people don't realize there were no furloughs. There were furloughs for a few weeks, but the CARES Act said if you furloughed anybody, you didn't get the money. So the few furloughs that occurred were immediately recalled. Everybody got the money. And I'm not just talking about a little bit of money. The total contribution for the CARES Act to the airlines alone, just one industry, $243 billion. That is no small chunk of change. Combination of the vaccines being introduced and then the booster, that by this point, the airlines could see that the end was in sight and we were actually going to need pilots. That we thought we wouldn't need them, but now we're recovering much faster than anybody thought possible. So I took my initial target of mid-22 to mid-21 based on the early retirements. And sure enough, starting in 2021, we began to hire pilots, 5,000 pilots in the last half of that year. So the last half of that year equaled the previous peak. So 3 times in history, the major had hired 5,000 pilots. But in the last half of 2021, we hired 5,000. And then we went on the next 2 years, 22 and 23, to hire 12 to 13,000 pilots each year for a total of 30,000 pilots when the previous peak was 5 in just 2.5 years. Unheard of, a generational hiring, which many say we'll never see again. I'm not so sure. I've got to say that we did that without an international recovery. So we did it with a straight domestic recovery. Now that international has recovered, we might even do better. The real problem right now is equipment, and we'll talk about equipment. So there's the 243 billion total contribution of the government. I was furloughed 3 times and bankrupt twice. The government never put a penny into my recovery. This was really a sensational contribution, and it was brilliant. I mean, our airlines it's a worldwide business, and we are strong worldwide now. We have pilot hiring, like I said, 5,500, 30, 5,000, 5,000, and then we came to the big numbers. We were headed for another good time when the Great Recession hit. We were headed for 5,000 again, but the recession took the wind out of that. So this was a forecast I made back in 23. Most of it still stands. Major airlines were trying to grow 15%, and they were unable. They ordered the airplanes. They were preparing to hire the pilots, and they just couldn't do it. There weren't enough pilots available at the regionals or the military. The regional airlines parked 500 airplanes, about 12 pilots per plane. They parked planes that would have required 6,000 pilots because their co-pilots, didn't have enough co-pilots, and then all their captains got hired by the majors, and we ended up with a severe shortage at the regionals. To park 500 multi-million-dollar assets with no income, you know that's got to be a severe shortage. Corporate was trying to grow about 10%. You couldn't buy a corporate airplane, new or used. You couldn't find a corporate pilot. At 2.5 pilots per plane, 3,700, and the military, at least 2,500 short. I mean, the Air Force has said the number 2,000 numerous times. So 24,000 pilots short in 2023, and we were still suffering from some of that in 2024. In 2025, things have started to get back closer to normal, but they're doing it not because the market has gone down, but because we're out of airplanes. And I'll talk about that. So this is a concept that I put out a couple of years ago that didn't gain traction until just recently, but the airlines ordered the airplanes necessary to meet the demand, to grow the 15%, the 10%. They had them coming, but they couldn't get the pilots. And at the same time, as the pilot supply ran out, we ran out of airplanes. We didn't certify the MAX 7 and 10 and the 777X. We had slow delivery caused by the blowout of the Alaska door on the MAX 9, reduced rate, and supply chain problems. So they ordered them at United last year, was supposed to get 100 airplanes. They didn't get any of those airplanes. They found 50 used Airbuses somewhere, which sort of saved their hiring, but it wasn't what they had ordered. They were lucky to find it. Other airlines weren't as lucky. Airbus has a geared turbofan problem. So they devised a fan braid that's made out of powdered metal, and it's not holding up as well as we thought. And as last count, 850 of those airplanes are parked worldwide, not just in the US. So the 850 that are parked have to be inspected. A percentage of those will have to be repaired. That requires first an inspection slot initially, and then a repair slot plus parts. Right now, the average Airbus is on the ground for a year from the time that it needs to be inspected. It's a year before it's back in service. So 850 airplanes out worldwide for a year, and it's not over yet. And it's not
Wow.
just Airbuses, it's also A220s. The parts, the repairs, each one of these has a different timeline. So the certification issue could be over tomorrow. They would go Omni VOR, you're certified, and those airplanes, which have been being built and are parked all over the ramp out in the North Pacific, there's airplanes parked everywhere that are built but not certified and undeliverable. The slow deliveries are ramping up, so we're going to get those airplanes. The geared turbofan, we already said, takes a year from the time they find it, so that could be a year or two. So over the next 1, 2, possibly 3 years, all these problems are going to be solved. When the airplanes are available, we're going to need the pilots. Right now, pilot demand is down, but this year the projection going in was 5,000 to 6,000 pilots. That 5,000 to 6,000 pilots is a normally peak year. So even though we're all crying in our beer about how low the hiring is, up until now, hiring has been actually the first few months right on target, 500, 600 a month. And right now with the tariff and the things that are going on, it's very hard to say what's going to happen. I'm afraid to say I do believe I see the cracks in the traffic, that we're going to have a reduced demand for air travel, and that's going to, of course, that's going to affect hiring. If it's a small crack, then it might be a minor recession and over before you know it. If it's a big crack, it could go into a big recession or even a depression, and that would end hiring and produce furloughs as well. So right now, it's not looking good.
Okay.
So I asked how many airplanes were not built of a number of consulting companies. And finally, Visual Approach produced this chart that shows, of course, we're not just missing this many airplanes, we're missing each year's airplanes in here. So we got a lot of airplanes that we're short. We should be up here and we're down here. So that's the shortage, and that's a big difference. So that's really the problem, is an equipment shortage. It does, in some ways it might help. In the past, the airlines have overexpanded and then cut back, overexpanded, cut back. So we call it shark's teeth, up and down. This may have actually taken out the up part a little bit by holding them back because they didn't have equipment. So maybe it didn't peak as high as it might have. Maybe it won't go as low as it normally would. We'll have to see. This was this happened in March of 24, and they said, oh, it's leveled off at about 650. The latest count is 850. So it didn't level off, and we're not quite sure how high it's going to go. This is the type of Airbuses. So we're looking at the park types, A320s, 220s, and the E-Jet E2s, okay, are the ones that are parked. Another way to look at it, when they say stored, they're stored waiting inspection and repair for some of them, all right? So, like I said, 2 or 3 years to solve it, 1,000 aircraft short in the US alone. As you probably know, half of those are replacement aircraft, retiring older, less efficient airplanes, and the other half are growth. So if we take the growth airplanes, 500 times 12, 6,000 pilots short, we have the normal demand, 5,000 or 6,000. We're right back to that 12,000 pilots a year that we had in 22, 23. Like I said, could even be higher based on international demand. Less demand at the majors slows everybody down. You don't have CFIs moving up to regionals, moving up to majors. So it slows down the entire food chain. The good news is, one way to counter the lack of airplanes, keep your old airplanes longer, fly your airplanes more, higher utilization, and you could take some of those 500 regional jets that were parked and put them back in service. So we had 500, we're down to about 350 that are parked, and most of those are going back in service this summer. So it's going to cause a pretty good demand at the regionals to staff those airplanes. And hopefully by the time that's done, a year later, we'll begin to get the benefits of the certification and maintenance repair necessary to put additional airplanes back in the market. And all of that is based on the demand, which I like to think of our business as a commodity. A loaf of bread, God forbid, a carton of eggs. So we have seats bolted into airplanes, and we get to fly those planes. But the commodity is that airline seat. And there's so many of them and so many providers that it's just like a commodity. There's lots of it. If you put more into the market, the price goes down. If you have less demand, the price goes down. So we have that commodity market that we're looking at. So we're directly tied to the GDP. Our commodity is a function, the selling of eggs, bread, and so forth, a function of the success of our economy in not just the US, but in the world market. And right now, the world market is under serious attack. Based on our own recovery, which it happened, uncertain with the tariffs, not sure what's going to happen there, but it doesn't look to be good. Major airline initially hired, cargoes were hiring, the domestic hiring returned, and finally international and business hiring returned, and we're fully back until the tariffs hit. So furloughs, there really weren't any. They went totally away. There's a few small ones now. There's the Warren Act that we talked about, the 10,000 Warren that I think would have been 20. No furloughs, big misconception that there were big furloughs at COVID. Didn't happen, but only because of the CARES Act, not because we didn't have more pilots than we needed. So I make a series of forecasts, and I say 5,000 to 6,000 this year, and that was before the tariffs. So not sure what's going to happen in the last half. The first half's looking like the first half of that, but the second half, in 3 to 6 months, we're sort of going to know how this tariff thing's going to go.
Okay.
There's an older chart. It just shows that airplanes, an airline with a fleet plan, United, for instance, has one of the best fleet plans, even so good that many people think they can't do it. But if they do it, they'll need a lot of pilots. So the best place, of course, is to have a fleet plan and not quite make it. It's better than not having a fleet plan and hoping to make it. So airlines with strong fleet plans are important. We have the manufacturers, Boeing, Airbus, Embraer's forecast, lots of demand for pilots based on looking at the long-range equipment forecast. This is historical world jet inventory, up and down with the economy. The little dips we see here, this was the Great Recession. We had one planned here, didn't know what it would be. Turned out it was COVID right here. And every 7 to 10 years, we get the downturn. The problem is, this is the actual, when 9/11, Great Recession again. And this is the relationship between the passenger traffic and the GDP. So man, if you don't see a 1-to-1 there, you're not looking at the same chart. Now it's an older chart. I have a newer one, but the effects of whereas the general economy, GDP, went down a little bit, the airlines exaggerate that. They go up higher and down lower than the general economy. And that's what we're concerned about right now. We think we're going to go down a little bit, and that's going to be exaggerated at the airlines. We do a pilot forecast, basically forecasting equipment times crew ratios. In maybe 10 pilots per plane at the regionals. 777 or A350 might have 15 crews and 30 pilots per plane. So big difference in the range of the plane based on to determine the number of pilots you need. You go over 8 hours, you get an extra co-pilot. Go over 12 hours, you get 2 extra co-pilots. Unless you're Delta, then you get another captain and a co-pilot. And if you go over 16 hours, you get a special rest area. So ratios. So when we see a major airliner go by, we're thinking 13.6 pilots per plane on average. Less with the short range airplanes, many more with the long range airplanes. So cargo, I get a lot of interest in cargo. Cargo did extremely well during COVID. Not only was there a lack of passenger flying, but there was a great need for additional cargo. And the cargo underneath the passenger airplanes was lost because they didn't operate. So the dedicated cargo really boomed. They had a lot of wide bodies. We've already said big airplanes have big paychecks. The joke about the bulge on the 747 being for the captain's wallet. So big airplanes, big paychecks, and 75% of their airplanes are wide bodies. They're going to get 64% are wide bodies, and they convert a lot. So we don't have necessarily orders for new airplanes to look at. We have to look at the conversion of older airplanes, which are hard to predict. And the reason they can do that, of course, is they have a much lower utilization. Whereas a FedEx airplane might go to Dallas and back once a day. And if he gets back to Memphis, pilots go home. Whereas a passenger airplane might do that 4 or 5 times a day. So low utilizations allows them to convert these older airplanes and still use them for an extended period. So it doesn't look like much, but the 3.7% growth is about 50% faster than passenger. So a great market. The real rub is only about 10% of the pilot job market are made up of cargo pilots. This is the forecast for the cargo's in light blue. And you can see not only is it 10% today, but it stays about 10% going forward. you're not going to have a lot more cargo pilots. Even though cargo is going to do very well, still 90% of the pilots are not going to be cargo pilots. So these were the two recoveries, domestic and international, passenger and cargo. Annual growth rate, about 5%. US, very large market, only 2.9%. But since it's such a large market, that's still a very significant growth. Regional pilots have been decreasing. The pay per departure model has been broken for quite a while. Major airlines are flying smaller airplanes. Smaller airlines are flying bigger airplanes. It's really getting fuzzy in between the regional equipment and major airline equipment. And even though the passenger would love to have a seamless service, we all know there's a difference in reliability between the regional airlines and the mainline airlines. When I was a commuter, and I commuted to Chicago for 23 years from Atlanta, I can assure you that I looked at the equipment when I made my choice about what I was going to fly. And you know that an experienced traveler, businessman or pleasure, does the same thing. So traffic was down about 5% at 9/11, another 5% Iraqi war, SARS, 2008 recession, that kind of stuff. But at COVID, it was down 10% long term. It lost 2 full years of growth. Looking back, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Oh,
Yes.
okay, all right. So I like to bring this up, even though it's an older chart. Everybody thinks the major airlines are getting dramatically bigger. They really haven't done that. They've done it through merger. American with US Air, America West, Delta with Northwest, United with Continental. Their growth rate from 2010 to 2017, about 5%. Allegiant, Frontier, Spirit, and Sun Country, about 140%. Now they're small. We still have the majority of traffic at the big airlines, but it's important to see that. And of course, a couple of them, Spirit in particular, sort of ran off the end of the earth and just didn't look down. They grew 577% between 2010 and today. They recovered very nicely from the COVID downturn. And they did that because they were single fleet, so they didn't have the equipment changes it had to make if you went up or down the seniority list. They had a domestic market, recovered much better than international. So they were ideally positioned, and they did extremely well. Everybody else, look at the Delta, United, American. They did really good.
Yeah, they're up when the majors are negative.
Right, and they recovered more quickly. They bounced back to 80, 90% in just a couple of months. And today, they're exceeding all of them. We're exceeding. And Frontier, of course, one of my favorites, done really well, the ultra low cost model of airlines. So utilization, of course, I make these forecasts, and people back when I had a membership service said you're just trying to sell memberships. But the fact was that the utilization is a hidden factor. So during COVID and past recessions and downturns, a bunch of airplanes show up in the desert. And then when they need them back, they bring them back. They also use the airplanes they have less. And when times are good, they use the airplanes more. And we rarely track utilization. My answer to that, you're just making it up, was, okay, if you use your airplane 8 hours a day, and then you use your airplane 12 hours a day, how many more pilots do you need? You need 50% more pilots without any more airplanes based on utilization.
Absolutely.
Well, some would say, well, we'll just use the pilot more too. You can't do that. There's rules against that. 30 and 7, 8 and 24, 100 hours a month, 1,000 hours a year. There's limits. You just can't do that. So you have to have more pilots to fly more planes. You can't just up the utilization on the pilot. Older fleets were parked. Delta parked a relatively late model wide body airplane, the 777. They only had a small number of them. Utilization's gradually increasing. The pilot productivity is near the max. So if you take 1,000 hours a year and divide by 12, you come to 83 hours. Well, most pilots are about making that for pay these days anyway. So you couldn't dramatically increase it without running into limits. So this is the utilization by category of airplanes. So narrow bodies did very well. Wide bodies not so well because they were trying to fit into the international market, which wasn't receptive. Regionals are way down, and turboprops are up. Turboprops are wonderfully efficient, but not well liked by the passenger. Looking at utilization, we've actually analyzed the bid sheets. Like I said, everybody knows somebody that worked 8 or 10 days a month and somebody who worked 20 or 22. We actually took the bid sheets, look at the days worked, the time off between trips and all that. Average pilot worked 15.2 days a month, flew 85 hours for pay. You make about 5 hours more than your bid. So it could vary widely, but when you actually look at it, and in a court case that I had all the pay records for American Airlines for 15 years.
Oh,
And when we analyzed and put them into a pivot table, guess what? What they bid and what they flew was about 4.8 hours difference from
okay.
more than they bid. Okay.
Mhm.
So in fact, the company challenged that, and they did the analysis and came back and said, "You're right." So I knew their pilots better than they did, only because I had a wizard pivot table guy that put it all into a pivot table in a day, and it would have taken me a year. 170 hours on duty. Clearly, you're at work at the airport. That's just the rub of the career. There's your 40-hour weeks. And the real rub is that you're away from home. So when your car leaves your driveway till it gets back in your driveway, most of us consider ourselves at work. And you do that 240 to 340 hours a month. So the good news is it's not 8-hour days. You do create meaningful time off, but you don't work 8 hours a day. And if you did it 9 to 5, you would work 22 days a month. Well,
Okay.
that's an additional week off every month of your life as an airline pilot for the rest of
Okay.
your life. Of course, aircraft, the ratio is going up because we keep adding more training. You know, we add ADSB, we add this and that. We have to train for it. The additional training is lowering. And now the rest rules, the 117, it's great if you want more time off. It's not great if you want to work more. So it's a two-edged sword. It's actually making us work maybe a half a day longer on average.
Yep.
Utilization trending up. This is the utilization, happens to be Delta a couple of years back, but look at the difference between the A330, their longest range airplane, and at the time, the 717, their shortest range airplane, between 11 hours and over 17 hours a day. That's where you eat up the additional pilots that are required based on the range of the plane. Cargo, of course, was way up and now back down a little bit, but not below previous levels, but below the COVID levels. Established airlines retire about 50% of their pilots on average. We thought pilots might not fly past 60 when the age 60 rule came in. That turned out to be false. They're at the top of their game. They're making the most money, have the most time off, flying their favorite plane, get to pick their trips. That's not the time you would retire. So very few pilots retired early on the 65. So we lost about 2,000 pilots doing that, an additional 1,000 annually for a couple of years. Of course, if you're short-sighted, it may prevent you from getting hired or promoted. If you take the long view, you've got 2 more years at max pay, which does trump the other stuff, but it slows down your career progress. I do think it'll change to 67
Yeah.
before it's over.
Let's
So
talk
this
about
was,
that really. Kid, if you don't mind, let me interject
yeah.
here. Let's talk about that here. A lot of my clients, pilot clients, and the industry, obviously the more mid-tier or junior guys, they don't want to see the change to the retirement age. And of course, the senior guys, they would do anything to get that age bumped up from 65 to 67. What's your analysis on that? What is holding things up? And if it is going to change, what's your prediction as to when that may happen?
Well, I missed it myself by 6 months. So that I would have had 5 additional years, several million dollars actually. But looking at it from a financial point of view, like I said, you get more than you lose. So if you're working as a co-pilot making 60%, 65% of the captain's pay, and you're stuck there, so you're losing 45% for 2 years, and you gain back 100% for 2 years of a bigger number. So financially, it's better to work longer,
Okay,
even though it
financially.
slows your career
Okay.
financially. Of course, seniority is like religion. I mean, you can't win talking about it. It's not factually based. It's not financially based. It controls your whole life, your time on, your time off, what you make, where you go, when you go. So it's more like religion, and nobody's ever going to like the effects of something like this on their seniority. But from a straight financial point of view, you will make more in your lifetime. If you're already working, you'll make more in your lifetime flying to 67 than without it.
So, Kat, what do you see the change? Are you keeping tabs on that as to this rule change with the FAA? Any suspicion as to when this could take place or not? Do you have any
Well, and
pulse?
I do
Feeling of
watch it.
pulse?
I do watch it. To say that I know what's going to happen, though, I think would be a stretch.
Okay,
But
fine.
I look at the variables. So last time we were approaching a shortage, and that was a driver. The shortage has backed off a little bit, but because of equipment, when the equipment returns, I believe the shortage will return. So that could be an impetus. Of course, anything on that brings the GDP down and brings the demand for flying down would lessen the pressure to change it. There's also the rest of the world has been making changes outside of the FAA. Doesn't seem to be a medical or scientific reason not to do it. So it's logical financially, it's logical medically. I don't pretend to have a read on the new administration. They tend to be business oriented, and keeping the pilot longer would benefit the airline because they have to find, train, and promote all the people when they leave. There's a huge expense. So there may be an impetus in the current administration to help out business by allowing pilots to work longer. They're also talking about it for air traffic controllers as well. So that's another sign that perhaps it might go longer. But I do believe it'll be extended in the next 5 or 10 years before most of your customers reach retirement.
Got
But
it.
who knows?
Okay.
That's
Please
my view
continue.
of it.
Okay,
Okay.
fantastic.
So this is the United retirements prior to COVID. This is the Delta retirements prior to COVID. And these are the Delta retirements after COVID. So you see you got 700-800 a year here. And the early retirements sort of took the peak out of that. Still very large retirements, good retirements, but the peak was removed. This is what happened at Delta. So Delta's retired almost 2,500 in a single year, where the average was 500. So they retired 5 years worth in a single year, and they came right out of here.
Yeah, that's due to COVID, correct? Yeah.
Right, due to COVID.
Early
You put it on a line
yeah.
chart. This is what they had before, and this is what they had after the early retirement.
Sure.
This is the retirements by number. But remember, we said you shouldn't look at numbers, you should look at percentages. A general view of what happens is your current pilots retire, and you have to make up the difference. So normally it's 50-50, but right now we're heavy on the retirements, and then we've been low on the growth. So this would typically be higher. So these are our current pilots as they retire. We have to replace them, and we have to hire for growth. And that is long term, that is a very healthy forecast.
Okay.
Productivity gains will be small. We talked about the 83 hours, and it doesn't include credit for minimum day, training, duty, vacation, sick leave, or trip time. So that all figures in. So the basic marker driver of this is the population. If we have a commodity, the population buys it. We have trained our folks that have money, and I'm not saying you're going to have money, but if you have money, it will be between the ages of 40 and 60 typically. How do you spend that money? What bread, eggs, or airline fares do you buy? Well, we've trained people that have money. They don't get in their car and drive to the beach. They get on an airplane and go to Aruba, Pacific, Europe, whatever. And that's not going to change. So when we have this bulk of people that are going to have money, they're going to spend it on air travel. That's the demand for our commodity. So that's a healthy forecast, not based on airplanes or based on what people want. Now, this is an older chart, but I love it because it shows the round trip domestic airfare has gone down. The number of places people can go has tripled. So if you were selling bread, you now have three times as many different. You've got rye, raisin, all this other stuff, and the price of the bread has gone down. This is what happened during COVID. So the prices for everything, airfare in blue, everything else went up. Gas, electricity, rent, mortgages, and food are all up here, and airfares are down here. Tremendous place to be. Another way to look at it, price index change from 19 to 23, 0.7% and 34% for gas. Man,
Sure.
If you're selling a commodity, that is a wonderful environment to sell more of your commodity.
Sure.
So here's another way to look at it. We've got city pairs, more places to go, and real transportation costs have gone down significantly. A good place for the thing. So risk factors, recession possible, certainly possible now. I believe it's already started. You look at some of the indicators, the future reservations, travel from outside the U.S. into the U.S., those kind of things have already come down. I'm afraid that's going to be irreversible in the short term. Labor, always under pressure. I mean, the management's job is to keep costs down. Pilots are a cost. Labor and fuel are about neck and neck for the two most expensive items, depends on the price of fuel at the time. Pilots, of the 30% that are employees, pilots are 10% of the group, but 30% of the cost. So on a broad basis, pilots make 3 times what everybody else makes, plus having a better retirement benefit package. Furloughs and bankruptcy didn't happen only because of CARES. If there's a general downturn, CARES has never happened before. I don't know that it'll happen again. I wouldn't count on it. Terrorism, ever present. And every time we go through the metal detector, we know. But last time we sort of shut the industry down for a while we figured it out. I don't believe that'll happen again. So it'll have less of an impact. I think it's inevitable, though. Mergers, most of the big ones have happened. We do have Alaska, Hawaii going on, and that I can't believe they killed the Spirit merger. I mean, it's a worldwide market, and the reasons they killed it for were domestic reasons, and it's just not a domestic market. So it's crazy. High fuel prices, definitely headed up with the war in the Middle East and all the other things going on. The flow agreement. So if you've got kids today that want to be airline pilots, you need to be headed toward these flow agreements. There was a short time there when American was hiring 50, 60% from the flow. Now they've backed off of that, but that's the future. New entrant airlines, really hard to start them up. In the old days, $5 million and somebody that could spell airline and you were ready to get started. Now you better have a complete management team and $100 million if you want to make sure it works. Pandemic could return, maybe handled differently, hard to say. Certainly a risk. Banking crisis was a risk. Single pilot. Well, my answer to that is our airplanes are built to last 25, 30 years. All the airplanes we have today are 2-pilot airplanes. But by the time your kids get there, it could be an issue. We have the technology. We could fly these airplanes with 1 pilot or no pilots. The real question is, will the passenger accept that? Right now, the answer is no. Will they accept it in the future? Maybe. Cargo probably go first because they don't have the passengers in the back. This was a matrix done by IATA, publicly available, puts all the different risk factors into a matrix. I need to get a more current one. So here's inflation. We've been told recently that inflation was highest ever, terrible, but yet inflation many times exceeded. In fact, today it's back down in the 2.5% range, which is close to the goal. Of course, any inflation is bad, but I'm afraid tariffs are going to have an inflationary effect. So I expect that to go back up. This is the cost of fuel. So back in 2008, the Great Recession, COVID. Have you heard of the crack spread? So you might be familiar with it. Your followers probably aren't. So the crack spread is the difference in cost between making jet fuel and the crude price, or basically turning it into car gas. And you can see what happened at COVID. The crack spread went crazy. So Delta bought a refinery. Great. That's going to produce low-cost jet fuel for Delta, right? No, it's a commodity. Airline seats are a commodity. So when Delta puts more jet fuel in the market, what does the price for jet fuel do? Goes down for everybody, not just for Delta. So thank you, Delta. It was a great idea, but it didn't work for just Delta. It worked for everybody. And it hasn't worked very well since COVID at all. Worked really good in here, not so good after COVID. So cost of fuel, my comment here, and this is the one pilots, we don't control that. Let's say that we have a pay increase like we've had, a 30% contractual increase or more, all these new contracts. Everybody says, well, airlines can't afford that. Well, if it's a known cost and you're making a business plan, you can plan for that and still make a profit. The problem with fuel is if you plan it here and it goes to here, now your business plan doesn't work and you're losing money. And because it's a broad-based commodity, it's hard to raise prices to get that price increase back. What we need are straight lines here. I don't care where they're at. We need them to be a constant price so we can plan on it and make a profit with a constant price, regardless of where that price is. Now, lower prices are better, don't get me wrong. This is the relationship between fuel prices in blue and airline profit margins in red. So now we have an inverse one-to-one relationship. Profits are what it's all about. And if I could predict that, I wouldn't have to be doing this. All right, so this is the average fleet age. Of course, United has ordered a bunch of new airplanes and they should come back down. This is the historical recessionary cycle. Like I said, 7 to 10 years, it's going to happen. This is the margin at the airlines in the third quarter of 23. these are excellent margins. All of them used to be down here in the single digits, and the airlines are doing a much better job of managing their businesses. We'll see how they do if this produces a recession. This is the recovery after COVID with the overall system, where we lost 35 billion, recovered by 2022. This was domestic, recovered by 2021. This is international, badly recovered in 2023, 24. So the idea here is that the airlines make profits, and this chart shows that when they do, they share them with the employees. So the airline employee wage and benefit percent as a percent of operating revenues been growing pretty steady ever since 2007 on this chart. So it's basically our share of the pie. And in hard times, we try to hold on to it. If it's really hard times, we give some up. If it's good times, we try to get our share of the pie.
Okay.
And quarterly, so where different airline groups are growing, we got Delta, United, international visitors. This is some of the information that shows that these international visitors are dropping off here. This is the first quarter of 2025 versus the first quarter of 2024, and international traffic starting to drop. That's a problem. The same thing on future bookings. Future bookings, although they're not below the low levels, a big change from what we've had. The introduction of tariffs right about here, and this is not up to date. I'm afraid it's gone a little bit lower. So that's it for my slides. I do have some pay information if you want to see it.
Yeah.
You want to talk about this a little bit first?
Yeah. This is what I like to do, Kit. I like to continue this conversation. The presentation that you gave was fantastic, but I need to head off to my 1 o'clock.
Right.
Can
Okay.
we add another 15 to 20 minutes? You can
Sure.
provide the information in terms of pay. I actually have a few questions on a follow-up afterwards.
Okay.
So
Great.
what I'm going to do, if it's okay with you, is to get you to send you a Calendly link,
All right.
schedule it at your convenience, and then we will attach the second recording to the first, and we will podge it together.
Okay.
And, make it one big podcast.
All right. I know you got to go, so
Yes.
I'll reschedule.
So we'll continue the scheduling
right.
for this. Thank you, Kit. Appreciate your
Yes, sir.
time. Look forward to getting a few of my questions answered. So
Okay.
see you
Bye-bye.
soon. Bye-bye. Thank
Yeah.
you.